Hi, Agnes.
Hi, Justin.
We're back again. Agnes Callard and I had so much fun talking about Zola a few weeks ago that we thought we would get back together and do it again. And I think eventually Agnes and I are going to come up with a huge archive of conversations dedicated to each of the 3,000 volumes of Les Rougon Macquart, right? That's our eventual plan. We're going to exhaustively discuss the works of Emile Zola. Sound good?
Well, we'll have hundreds of thousands of listeners, I'm sure, by the end.
Yes. Um, so last time we discussed l'assommoir. I forget how we translate that into English. And that was the kind of what's the term we use in English? Zola's uh dive crawl, is that what I'm looking for? His trip to the seedy side of Paris to examine all of the proletarian pathologies that he could find there in minute detail. And as I told Agnes last time we talked, when we talked about that novel, I was pretty horrified. I thought it was a sort of pornography, and just very kind of in rubbing your face in the proletarian pathologies with glee and with very little mercy towards the reader or towards the people. And I was kind of horrified. But wow, how different the experience of Au Bonheur des Dames is. Maybe, Agnes, you can get us set up with this. First of all, I forget how we translate this into English. Remind us a little bit about the kind of the coordinates of the novel. It's where it fits in the multi-volume series, what the English title is, stuff like that.
Yeah. So it is the second novel about Octave Mouret, who is in the middle class line of the Rougon-Macquart family tree. Gervaise, who's the heroine of L'Assommoir, is in the lower class branch.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first novel in which Octave appears, it's called Pot Bouille, and it is about an apartment building and the kind of sexual intrigues that happen behind the scenes, although the apartment building presents itself as being very respectable, and Octave is a major culprit in those. He's a very
Mm-hmm.
different figure in Au Bonheur, which is so L'Assommoir is, my version is translated as the drinking den, though it gets
Right, yeah.
translated in a variety of ways. And Au Bonheur des Dames is translated from as the ladies' paradise, though once again it has also been translated in a variety of ways, the ladies' delight, I think, as well.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
uh and so that's the name actually of the department store that Octave he basically inherits it from the woman that he marries at the end of Pot
Right.
Boy, but she dies in between, and he's constantly expanding it. And it is a story, it's a kind of poem to business and
Yeah,
industry and consumerism and capitalism.
yeah.
And the central character in the novel is this growing, burgeoning department store, this kind of it's a kind of icon of health and robustness and vigor. And then meanwhile, it's crushing and destroying the lives of all the small businesses around it, with a kind of total, like, blithe ruthlessness, something like that. And there's also a romance between Octave, who's running this department store, and Denise, who's like a young woman from the provinces who comes and then ends up working there. And she's one of the least interesting of Zola's characters, in my opinion. She is
Really?
also the only unequivocally positive character that I have yet encountered in Zola.
Wow.
Um, I find her just kind of just kind of dull to me. Uh, but maybe I'm so used to these like rogues that
Yeah.
I can't stomach this pure goodness of Denise, who always
Interesting.
responds perfectly to every situation and is nothing but virtue at every moment.
Yeah.
It's such a shock to read that in Zola.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting that Zola himself said that Gervaise is his most, I can't remember the exact word I mentioned in our last thing, like his most positive, his most likable or whatever character.
Hmm.
And I agree with that. Like even though Denise is a much more positive character than Gervaise, somehow you really feel for Gervaise. Whereas
Interesting.
I hold Denise at a distance, but it doesn't really matter because the main character is not Denise and it's not Octave. It's the store.
It's the store.
It's
Yeah.
watching the store. It's the various moments at which they have sales, and then the store
Yeah.
explodes in these various displays and also these various reorganizations of itself and various ways it has of seducing the women inside of it.
It's incredible how contemporary it feels, isn't it? I mean, that store is the tale of Amazon or any number of other disruptive appearances in economic history over the past 200 years. And it is incredible how much the different players in this mid-19th century transformation remind us of people today, small business owners who don't want to be overrun by Amazon, the people in the tech world who say it's coming like it or not.
Right.
So familiar. A few things, a few reactions to what you just said. I actually loved Denise for her virtue.
You're probably
I
a better
know
person than I am.
no, I mean, I actually, what you're describing is familiar to me. One of my favorite novels is Philip Roth's Sabbath's Theater,
Okay,
which
that's a Roth
por
novel I haven't read.
portrays just the absolute most satanic, rotten character ever conceived. And right after I read that, I was on a Philip Roth kick, and I went and I read American Pastoral, where, in a sense, the protagonist is like the good angel equivalent
Yeah.
of the satanic Mickey Sabbath. And I thought, this is boring. It's like it's got all of the same verve, but none of the evil. I hate it, right? So I know what you're describing, but I didn't feel it this time. And I actually loved seeing Denise always kind of being such a stable kind of fixed virtuous commodity, especially in relationship to her brothers, who, like, her older brother is the one who kind of reminds you of the proximity of the world of l'Assommoir, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he comes and is always asking for money to pay off women to avoid getting into duels and stuff like this, and he's just louche and a chaos principle, but Denise calms him and equalizes the situation, and she's just a beautiful soul. I liked her. Oh, and what I really liked about her was that, I mean, if there is one thing problematic about her, it's that, notwithstanding her virtue, she comes out very decidedly and explicitly to all her family members who are hurt by this, to everyone who loves her who is hurt by this. She comes out on the side of Amazon, which is to
Yeah.
say, on the side of the giant department store that's rolling over everything. And why does she do this? Because it's bigger and shinier and more impressive, right? And so, in a sense, like, is that a compromise of her virtue, or what does that show? I don't know, but I thought the way Zola put her on the side of the main character, as you put it, the main character being I don't know, not evil, but certainly, beyond the ordinary shopkeeper's sense of the good. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so far, A Bonheur de Dame is by far the most positive
Hmm.
of any Zola novel. It has a happy ending, unheard of in Zola.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Yeah.
And the treatment of this department store, I would say, is very positive. On
Hmm.
the whole, it's presented
Hmm.
as just an amazing, wondrous thing. Now, it also
Hmm.
causes lots of suffering, and Zola has there's a kind of brutal accuracy to his vision, where he's like, yeah, great, awesome things cause tons of suffering.
Hmm. Yeah.
But the contrast to this great store is just the death and darkness and stagnancy of all these small shops that are doing nothing.
Yeah.
And they're just passing down a tradition from many generations, with no thought of like innovation, exploration, excitement. There's actually a whole Zola novel called The Dream, that's sort of about an entire little sort of world still
Mm.
stuck in the medieval period. And you almost feel that little world of the in these little shops. And there's a character, I think, that where who confronts Mouret and is almost where, even though he's not a big character, but the confrontation is significant for the point of view of like thinking about like Amazon versus the little guy. Is this guy Valognosc, Paul
Oh, yeah.
Valognosc. So it's
Oh,
his
right.
old friend.
Yeah. Who's supposed to be based on Schopenhauer, according to the notes in my edition.
Oh,
Or,
really? Okay.
yeah.
There's a super Schopenhauer character in another novel. So he's like,
Hmm.
this guy's watered down Schopenhauer compared to um, but in any case, so here's a guy who did better at school than Mouret. And you can hear in this Zola's own echoes, right? So he was somebody who did badly at school and who
Hmm.
didn't, I think tried 2 times to enter into a higher level of school and failed, and then just gave up on his education, just like Mouret. But this guy was hired, he was successful, and he manages to get like some post in the ministry and get some small amount of money, but he kind of can't muster up any energy for anything. And then at the end of the novel, he has been married to the daughter of Madame de Beauve, and he is like horrified that his mother-in-law has been caught shoplifting.
Right. I want to get
And
back to that scene. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so you have this contrast between Mouret, who's trying to do something. Fundamentally, I think Zola has a real appreciation for people who are trying to do something.
Yeah.
And then this world that isn't trying to do anything at all.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is getting trampled and destroyed. And
Mm.
Zola has a lot of compassion for the
Hmm.
suffering of the people who are being destroyed and trampled, but ultimately he's on the side of the tramplers, as I
Yeah.
see it.
Like Denise. And yeah, I mean,
Right.
one
And so
gets the sense.
that's not a fault of Denise, as I see it,
Right.
because she's representing Zola's point of view
Right,
there.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's well, a few things kind of from the ground's eye view, so to speak, here in Paris. The department store Au Bonheur des Dames is a very thinly fictionalized version of actual department store called Le Bon Marché. Which was founded by someone whose name is Boucicault, who has, numerous monuments to him around Paris, and on whom the Mouret character is pretty closely based, at least again according to my Flammarion notes, where in some cases there are endnotes that show you Boucicault's own drafts of how to put the chiffon out to maximize sales on the tables, stuff like that. Very, very close. I can't quite figure out geographically. Le Bon Marché today is on the rive gauche, on the left bank, and then on the right bank we have two major department stores. One is Printemps and one is Galerie Lafayette, and they're both right next to each other, and they're both basically on the Boulevard Haussmann of the right bank. And Haussmann is, of course, the architect who under Napoleon III smashed a good portion of the old Paris and built up the facades that we recognize today as Paris, right?
And he's a character in the novel as
Exactly, yeah. So, and a lot of this has to do with these, the overhaul of the look of Paris, because in the novel, Mouret wants a huge chunk of the new Paris to be kind of swallowed up by the new department store. But I don't know what happened exactly. I'm sure it wouldn't be impossible to learn, but I think that, as far as I can tell, well, no, I'm certain that that Au Bonheur des Dames, the fictional department store, is on the right bank, loosely where Lafayette and Printemps actually are. So it's kind of like a fictional amalgam of all the different department stores that have been in competition in Paris since the 19th century, or since the era of Napoleon III. And I've been in and out of these places over the past 15 years. I know all three of them probably better than I should. And it's so funny to me to think about this now. I mean, it was just so revelatory. Every time I go into a department store, I wonder, why do they put the men's department far from the entryway? Psychologically speaking, it would seem that men would be more likely to give up quickly, so they should put their stuff right at the entryway, whereas women will want to go and explore more deeply. But a lot of this novel is Mouret being, in a pretty problematic chauvinistic way, kind of a specialist in women's psychology, right? Like thinking about how women think, are supposed to think, etc., mastering the woman's mind and exploiting the hell out of it, right? Like fracking its attention for maximum profit in a way that is so cynical, and again, so familiar in the era of internet pop-up ads for J. Crew or whatever. It's just so incredible to see the origin story of this whole mentality that still dominates our world.
Yeah, so I think that this is the most interesting feature of the novel, is shopping as the seduction of women. And I think that what's so interesting about it is, so first of all, the novel, presents the whole shopping experience as just being highly sexualized. The touching of these fabrics and the kind of ecstatic feelings among the crowds. So it's this kind of, and it's seduction, right? Of a certain kind, but it's really sexless. So this is, as far as I haven't done, I have like a couple more left. So, but as far as I've read, it's the most sexless and the most foodless of Zola's novels. So it's least concerned with what is low. It is thus the most decorous, actually, in a certain way, of his novels, right? So like, I've been reading lots of sort of the reception of Zola in his time, and like the main problem people had with him is like, he's tasteless. He's just Henry James. He was just missing the taste. That was, people were just shocked by this kind of tastelessness, this lack of sophistication, this lack of artistry, which Zola freely admitted. He's like, I don't care about form. But that comes out, it just punches you in the face in L'Assommoir. But in this novel, precisely because there's no sex and there's no food, or very little of either of those things, there's this sublimate. Instead, there's this sublimated sexuality in the shopping experience. And you're absolutely right that he is, he wants to conquer woman. He wants her to be his, but also it's represented as, this is what women want. They want to be seduced. They want to be seduced, and they want to not notice that they're being seduced fundamentally. And it's because he figures that out, that he draws all the women into the store. And I think like, it's not sexist. It's the truth. If it weren't the truth, it wouldn't work. I mean, maybe it's also maybe the truth is sexist. I'm not sure how to put that, but he taps into something that's really there. And so I feel like the question I'm left with at the end of this novel, more than any other question, and I'm very curious what you have to say about it, is, why do women like to shop so much?
Don't ask me. I mean, my mentality is as many light years away from Mouret's as possible. Like, I have no idea. I don't understand it. If I had things my way, all I know is that they would put the men's section right at the front door of the ground floor so that I wouldn't have to go up and down the escalators and I could just dip in and dip out really fast, right? But
So they do that, by the way, in American stores. In
no, they
American stores, you go to
don't.
Uniqlo. Yes, you go to
Yeah.
Uniqlo, you go to Gap, whatever. The men's stuff is right there at the beginning,
Well,
and they
not
do it for the. I think I've always thought it was exactly the reason you said. And so I wonder, maybe it's the women shopping for the men in France, or something, so they can.
yeah. Well, I mean, like, why do they put a guy with six-pack abs on men's underwear? Like, men certainly don't want to see that. I assume that they put that there because women are shopping and they see the man and they're like, I'm going to get this for my husband, but deep down they're thinking, I'm going to get this guy with
Best
the
man.
six. I don't know. I don't understand it. I mean, it definitely makes me not want to buy underwear ever, right? Okay, we're getting off track, but all of this is to say, I don't understand the psychology of shopping, gendered or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with it. I know people who understand it better than I do, but it's just an absolute mystery to me. And I mean, maybe one thing that I appreciated about this novel was that I was finally introduced to the topic of consumer psychology in a
Yeah.
way that I found compelling. Like, I wanted to linger with it and meditate on how this all works, whereas before I've just kind of found it repulsive and boring. So that's really something. But also, I guess, I mean, one thing that this novel, first of all, I mean, I've been reading only 19th century literature for over a year now, and one thing that always just blows me away is how it's as if the world that we know popped into existence ex nihilo circa 1840. By 1870, it was just totally familiar. And you have department stores where people are thinking exactly like the board of directors at Amazon, as I've said, right?
Yeah.
And you have women chattering with one another about sales and about return policies and things like this. And I mean, I found myself throughout much of the novel thinking, what were these women's ancestors 3 generations earlier doing, right? Like, what was this latent capacity being expressed as 100 years before Zola? You know what I mean?
You
I
get the
don't.
answer in other Zola novels, because what you're saying is only true of Paris. It's not true
Yeah,
of the
yeah. I guess
provinces.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
It's
You
going to be
feel.
true of other places by like 1910, but
Yeah,
not by
yeah.
even by 1870.
One of the things that was really interesting to me. So, I guess, I mean, I'm not telling you this. I'm just telling listeners. The even the cutting edge department store in Paris in the mid 19th century mostly sold fabrics,
Right.
quantities of fabrics to be sewn. And the great innovation of this of Mouret, in real life Boucicault, was to make connections with artisanal producers of raw materials all over France, and to buy them wholesale, to bring them and sell them for very little profit, right? But to do it fast. And so the key principle, the motto practically, is move fast, or move fast and break things, right?
Yeah.
Like, always have merchandise cycling through. But the merchandise was still basically just just what was being produced by artisanal fabric makers, especially in Lyon. I thought that was interesting. There was a significant Lyon-Paris connection. And so the local, oh, and then there's the one dimension of this is that at some point, the department store starts including Paris artisans. And then the artisans right in the neighborhood of the department store are like, what are Paris artisans doing selling their stuff in a department store? They're here in Paris anyway. And so that was like a great betrayal. But it's so interesting to see like the concept of what this store should be doing kind of taking shape, and still indeed, you know, having a lot of holdover from the older economy that, you know, goes back to the Middle Ages, or, you know, a long time.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what do you feel you learned about consumer culture? I agree with everything you said, and that's also the draw of the novel for me, is that sort of dive into consumer psychology and somehow the judiciousness of it. Like that is, Zola wants to show you everything that's horrifying about consumer psychology and everything that's wrong with it. But then he also kind of wants to present it as something sort of beautiful and grand at the same time.
Yeah.
He's not a scold. He's not a
Yeah,
moralist.
no, absolutely not. I think, I mean, the same people who look like pathetic do-nothings, or not do-nothings, but pathetic or stubborn, that's the word. Like the old man, I forget his name, but the particular,
Bourras or
Bourras,
Baudu,
exactly.
Bourras.
Is such a compelling figure because, you know, he's an artisanal umbrella maker, and just absolutely refuses to budge an inch in the way he works. And he's fully aware that his kind is going extinct, but just, you know, wants to squeeze through to the end. And the scene where he's sculpting the wooden handle is some kind of, what is it, a lion's head into the wood of the handle of the umbrella, and the little baby is grabbing at it, is just so touching, because, you know, what Bourras does is a beautiful thing, right? And it's wonderful that there are people who are able to, you know, turn umbrella making into you know, a craft that involves like the work of the soul, right? It's wonderful. But indeed, it's also pathetic in the way Zola represents it. And it's just kind of an attitude of like, well, tough luck, you know, wrong historical era, pal.
Right.
I'm not going to say I'm compelled by that, but it's certainly it's certainly impressive how how complete Zola's picture is of the whole scene and the different players.
Yeah, and I mean, so one thing that keeps coming back to me about Bourras is that he's the reason why Denise survives. Right? So she gets kicked out of the store at a certain point, right? And the store doesn't have any kind of safety net. And, you know, he takes her in, he gives her a cheap room, and then when she just doesn't have any money, she's starving to death with the youngest brother, and he brings her food. And that's what these sort of, you know, these small neighborhood stores, like, they took care of their own and as family. And that's part of what we're losing now. Denise then tries to reincorporate that into the factory. You get this constant refrain of this word phalanstery. I don't know how to say it in English. I didn't know this word. I had to look it up. But this idea of like a socialist commune keeps being used to describe this department store, which is just amazing. But of course, gradually it sort of turns into something like one. That is, it's, you know, Mouret starts to adopt these sort of worker-friendly policies.
Right.
And there's almost, to me, something like even more horrifying in that even the family functions are now being taken up by it's even more of a monster. It's really now a whole world. But still, Bourras played this, like, without him, she wouldn't have made it. She wouldn't have been able to come back.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's one thought I had about him. And the other one is, there's this really interesting contrast, I think, between someone like Barras and someone like Valognosc, where there's a way in which you can't, like, Barras is the last remnant. He's like a dying breed, but someone like Valognosc, just, he can't have buy-in anywhere, right? So like nothing matters, everything is pointless. That's not how Barras feels. Barras is like, no, umbrella handle shaped like lions are important. But even if you have someone like Barras, what you don't have is the next generation, right? And that's what happens with Baudu as well, that he doesn't hand the store down, that there isn't, the next generation just doesn't want this inheritance.
Right. I suppose, one thing to mention for listeners who haven't read it is that in this era, the employees, at least the unmarried women employees, and they preferred unmarried women employees, lived in company-owned barracks that were, potentially a kind of utopian environment, though when Denise arrives, it's more a kind of a convent vibe with strict rules and really no pleasure. And Denise,
and no
ends
heating.
up,
It's like freezing cold.
and she has no idea of anything of Paris beyond the kind of campus of the department store, extremely limited. And also that there's the canteen, and this is the one representation of food in the novel. The food is disgusting, right? And this is like a source of kind of almost Mel Brooks level humor, some of the scenes where they're served disgusting food with giant veins in it and stuff like this, and it's inedible, and everyone's complaining, and the cook says, well, I can't feed this many people if you expect it to be good too, and so on. And so it's like it's a total institution, this place, for better or worse. I hadn't thought about that it was, that sex and food get, kind of run through the kind of modern institution of consumerism in this way. But you're absolutely right. Strange. But you asked me, I mean, again, I don't have, I think, there is sex in the novel, in that it's sublimated into kind of the men versus women, or how do we crack the secret of woman, and that is, also what old-fashioned love stories are about. But here, cracking the secret means, again, maximizing profit. But Mouret seems to be in love with that too, right? And there's we're kept in suspension until the very end as to whether Mouret and Denise are actually going to get together. And the suspension is maintained because we're led to believe that, in Mouret's view, he has to remain sort of a perpetual bachelor. But being a perpetual bachelor means really being married to the department store, which means, in a sense, being married to all women, and seeing to their various chiffon and silk needs with every fiber of his being, right? And it's a strange kind of depiction of that relationship. But yeah, it really is a pretty, in the end, I think, pretty bleak view of let's say the abyss between men and women.
Yes. So of gender relations, definitely. I agree with that. It's though I don't know that it's more bleak than anywhere else in Zola. But I think it's the most kind of concerted treatment of that. Maybe the other one that's interesting is his excellency Eugene Rougon,
Oh yeah.
And him and Clorinde, and that weird, that's also man versus woman in a weird way, how men seek power and how women seek power is like but I think that this is, so what's interesting is that at the end, right, this final scene, he gets these like piles of money on his desk, and it's just like falling off the desk, and he doesn't care about it, right? So you say, what Murray really loves is money. I think that's true, but he's like, he's just unable to be satisfied by these piles of money, and thus it finally something breaks in him, and he's willing to propose to Denise. And I think it does, like, I think that, you know, the novel represents that as the conquest of Murray in some sense, right? Where it's something triumphing over money, namely woman is triumphing over money, and that's been foretold from the beginning. Like, the women will get their revenge, right? He is told that by, I remember a movie, it's Board of Uncle.
Oh right, yeah.
Women are going to get their revenge, don't you realize? And that this is now represented as the revenge of woman, is that she ties him down. Now she owns him. And that goes along with all of these changes that he has made to his store at Denise's request, to, you know, have a game room and have like pension funds and have, which were all real, all these things actually happened. And so there's another force besides money in there. And woman in some way is that force, interestingly. And so, but it's definitely a it's not a meeting of minds. It really is like a who is in charge or who's conquering who kind of picture of gender relations.
Yeah. It's old-fashioned battle of the sexes dynamics.
Right.
But yeah, I guess, but what about though this, I mean, is this a discovery, or is he helping to bring this into the world? This kind of, and also not just with women, but also with children, because a significant part of Denise's work is opening up the children's section, which the mothers love, and this discovery of kind of the next stage of capitalism is like opening up a new frontier of consumers who were previously neglected, right? And so the great new resource for extracting money is women. And this is, you know, I think within the context of the 19th century, I'm no specialist of this. You can read this as both, you know, moving exploitation to a whole nother level, and you can read it also as you know, social advancement for at least women of a certain class, right? You can read it both ways, but it really is a very vivid picture of that dynamic, of that change.
Yeah, so that makes me think, I actually maybe have a slight disagreement with you now. I hadn't realized it until about what Murray is ultimately after. So I don't think it's money. So in the description of the adding that branch, it's described as seducing women via their children. That is, what Murray has discovered is another way to seduce women. I think his fundamental goal is the conquest of women, or the seduction of women. That actually links together the Murray of this novel and the Murray of the previous novel, who's doing it through more conventional, actually seducing women means. And now he's like, but that's just 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 women. I want to seduce hundreds of thousands of women. Do what means of this store. It's true that he takes a pleasure and a delight in the money, but I almost feel like the money symbolizes for him his conquest of woman. And that's exactly why at the end of the novel, where the woman he's trying to conquer is Denise, the money suddenly means nothing to him, because it doesn't represent his conquest of her.
Right. Yeah. Oh, and that scene with all of that money kind of spilling off the desk, it's so vulgar. I mean, that, you know, almost is like, that's the kind of rubbing your face in it that I found de trop when I was reading L'Assommoir. But here he goes again. Zola getting carried away.
He is vulgar. I just think that's true about
what was I going to ask about? Oh yeah, I love you mentioned this in passing, the final maybe 20 pages, and obviously we're giving spoilers, sorry people, but you know, this isn't a Marvel Comics movie, so you know, you don't really have to be held in suspense. But I was held in suspense, and if you want to be held in suspense in the same way, stop listening now. I was held in suspense because in the last 20 pages, we were placed in suspension, unable to know how it was going to come down, whether Mouret was going to decide to propose a marriage to Denise, and give us this rare happy ending, because most of these pages were occupied with this absurd situation where the Countess de Beauve has just been caught shoplifting, and she's indignant. She says, "Don't you know who I am?" And the store security guard, the inspector, has seen this from aristocratic women already numerous times who have developed a pathological shoplifting compulsion. And I just thought that was it was like just high comedy that was really driving me crazy. I was like, I was delecting it, but I was also like, come on, I want to know how this ends. But what is the significance within the work as a whole of this Countess's shoplifting habit? Like, why is she doing this? I don't know. Maybe you have an idea.
I do have some thoughts. So first of all, an interesting thing, because the way you described the end of the book is also how I experienced it the first time. So I was shocked when I reread it for this, because I read it a couple months ago. So I reread it for this conversation. And the whole shoplifting episode is only 4 pages in my volume.
Oh.
And that's including the conversation with Valagnosc afterwards. I mean, it's 4 pages total. But I also remembered it as what goes on for a lot of pages is the descriptions of white things.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pages.
Yeah.
But it had the same effect on me, where like it has such gravity. It feels like a very important element in the book. So I think here's one element of it, is that it is describing so the point is, she doesn't need to steal. She takes pleasure in stealing. And that is a kind of manifestation of the sort of seduction that is taking place. There's something sexual and forbidden about this shopping experience. And even the very fact of the forbiddenness of the theft makes it attractive. So I think it helps you really see just how sexual the experience is. But the other thing is, I think it's all a setup for the final conversation with Valagnosc, where he is all of a sudden, after being he's this whatever Schopenhauerian kind of nothing matters, there's nihilist, no meaning, I'm discarding everything. And then when his mother-in-law is caught shoplifting, he is here, I'll read from this page because I love this. Mouret says, hadn't he heard him affirm the pointlessness of life scores of times? Hadn't he considered misfortune alone to be interesting? So Mouret preached indifference to him in a friendly, bantering tone, and Valagnosc lost his temper. He was quite unable to regain his now compromised philosophy. The whole of his middle-class upbringing recoiled from his mother-in-law in virtuous indignation. As soon as he experienced something personally, at the slightest contact with human misery at which he had always sneered, the braggart skeptic in him collapsed in suffering. So I think this is really the sort of triumph of Mouret, is this moment where there's this guy who's like, I have a higher posture than you, Mouret. You're all concerned with the things of this world, and I'm this Schopenhauerian skeptic. But he is not able to maintain his philosophy when life touches him, and he turns out to be just another conservative. Right.
Whereas Mouret is actually pretty philosophical, so to speak, about this phenomenon of pathological shoplifting. It's as if Mouret knows the human soul, right? Because he studied it to maximize his profits. And he obviously he doesn't want to be shoplifted, but he factors this into how the business runs, and is even a bit amused, I think, by the Countess's discovery, right?
Right. He sees it as part of the cost of doing business.
Yeah, yeah,
And he
yeah.
also understands that in some sense he's bringing this about. Like this is
Yeah,
kind of like this is just a manifestation that he's being really successful with these laces. You know, no one can resist his laces because she's
yeah.
shoving them down her sleeve.
Yeah, right, right, right. That's ingenious. And also, it reminds me of the earlier scenes where the inspector's basically sexual harasser, abuser type who coerces the shop girls to come over to his apartment in order to not get fired. And so when he catches the Countess, then everything is, just hypercharged with what are ultimately sexual pathologies across the board, right?
Right. But I think what's like so interesting is the way in which it's made very clear in a variety of ways that sex is also forbidden inside of the store. So intra-store relationships are forbidden. And he's got to take them to an apartment away from the store itself.
Yeah.
And like Pauline is really worried about keeping her job because her husband gets hired, and that's too much fraternizing, right? And so there's there's a great scene where I can't remember who it is. One of these high class women is having a glove put on by a salesman.
Oh yeah.
And he's putting the glove on and he's like stroking her hand and she just doesn't even notice.
Yeah, right.
She's not experiencing it as sexual because who's he? He's nothing.
Yeah.
And that movement from anyone else would be very sexual, but so there's something also desexualized about the store, which allows it gives it cover. Like the kind of sublimated eroticism is possible because sex is actually prohibited in a bunch of different ways.
In Henry James, there are a lot of characters who are very obviously gay or lesbian, but that never comes out explicitly in the plot because it can't in the context of Victorian literature.
It does in Zola, so it can. It's just Henry James didn't have the guts, but go on.
Well, no, but some of the male shop employees, I was wondering. I don't think any of them are explicitly gay, but I suspect at least some of these characters are coded gay by Zola, or maybe not if there are other novels with explicitly gay characters.
Nana has like female homosexuality very explicitly, like sex described and everything. Now I've had this like vague memory that in one of the earlier novels I thought there was some kind of passing reference to male homosexuality. I just can't remember anymore. It was like one of the first ones I read. But I think Zola is okay just mentioning that.
Just say okay, okay, because
he got in big trouble for it, but he did it.
Yeah, right. Well, then let me rewind then. Take back my speculation on the representation of some of
that's actually not that doesn't mean you're wrong. It could just be that like he's not that interested in those characters, and so he's going to represent there could well be gay characters where he's just not foregrounding that in the context of this novel.
Right.
So I think that's totally possible. It's just that I don't think he would feel a need to express it in a coded way.
Right. You're surely right. Yeah. You sent me this wonderful passage. I don't know what it was from. It was in French, but talking about Russian love for Zola, and it reminded me actually a lot about a quote from Maxim Gorky, of whom I am not a great fan, for both literary and political reasons. But it's a quote from Gorky where he is denouncing Proust as a ridiculous, subjective idealist, ass kisser of the aristocracy, who's so kind of lost in his childhood nostalgia that he can't even form a kind of half complete political idea, like a grown-up. And Gorky explicitly says, we need here in the Soviet Union to be reading more Balzac. Now, Balzac, that's the guy who really does it for us here. This is a French author who knows how to engineer the human soul. And you and I have talked a bit before about the resonances between Balzac and Zola. Certainly, both of them have equally ambitious projects, and both of them are, trying to do a kind of social equivalent of something like Buffon's natural history, right? Like taxonomizing social reality. And in a sense, in that regard, both Balzac and Zola, I think, are simultaneously novelists and some kind of social scientists. They're doing qualitative social science. But tell me a little bit about this quote you sent me about Zola's reception in Russia.
Yeah. So this is from Guy de Maupassant.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, you quoted that, of course. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's from,
he has like an essay on Zola. It's a great little essay. I've just been reading the reception of Zola. Unfortunately, so much of it is unfortunately for me, so much of it is in French and not translated. So I gotta, go really slow. But but in this case, of course, I'm gonna read it because it's Guy de Maupassant. And it's funny. It starts out with just he's so obsessed with Zola's name.
Yeah.
Like he's like, no novelist has ever been more perfectly named than Zola, because it's like an explosion.
Right.
Anyway, and then here what he's saying in the passage that I sent you is that, it's like Zola's reception in Russia is like in some way better and more enthusiastic than in France. Tolstoy thought of Zola as the French novelist.
Mm-hmm.
And he diagnoses this as because, Zola, I mean, he's vulgar, he's brutal,
Mm-hmm.
he's a demolisher.
Yeah.
And these people are just nihilists. The Russians are nihilists to the bottom of their hearts. And they love this brutal demolisher. And somehow he is feeding their need to see the worst in humanity. That's de Maupassant's diagnosis.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't read that much into this. I've spent time in Russia and studied Russian, and they're also obsessed with like Jack London. I mean, it can just be a result of contingencies of who gets translated.
Right.
I don't necessarily. I'm not going to dispute Guy de Maupassant's observation necessarily, but there could be any number of reasons why he would get.
But it is very striking. It persists. My best friend is Russian, and she was like, "Of course, I read all the Rougon-Macquarts when I was like 12 years old." Is it like, of course you had read Zola, and so he now, by contrast, like the first person in charge of translating Zola into English, in England was jailed for it. And I think that Au Bonheur des Dames was the first Zola novel that appeared in English in the USA.
Interesting.
I believe that's true, and which makes it's such an American of all his novels. It's the most American, right? So it fits. But obviously you have like reports and reviews from people like Henry James way earlier because they were reading it in French. But just in terms of when does it hit the American public? And that's what the American public can maybe process is this novel. But like you feel like, well, maybe the Russians, like the description of peasant life in La Terre is just like, it's really brutal and bleak. It's easily as bleak, maybe more so than L'Assommoir. And I kind of associate the Russians with sort of being willing to face up to that reality in a way that maybe the English were not.
Right. Yeah. The, scenes of whipping horses that can't stand back up and things like that, and that's very typically Russian, I suppose.
Right. But and what Zola gives you in addition is just that the peasants are depraved. They're sexually depraved. They are nasty to each other. They are cutthroat. Like they're not. It's not Tolstoy's peasants, right? It's not the idealization of peasant life. It's like the truth about peasants.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's all about the pathologies. Zola likes pathologies. I mean,
Yeah.
that's again that I think I said that quite a bit about La Bête Humaine, about l'Assommoir, and now it's been one of the leitmotifs of our discussion of Au Bonheur des Dames as well. Um, let me see, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, the Americanness of it. It's funny. I mean, in I think the Second Empire, Third Republic, right up to the Paris World Fair of 1900, and the building of the Eiffel Tower and the visits of Thomas Edison to Gustave Eiffel so that they could sit at the top of the tower and talk about radio waves and stuff like that. Like in the late 19th century, Paris was like the capital of secular modern optimism in a way that was fully, I think, transferred to New York by about
Mm,
1905, 1910, right?
right.
And it you see the same thing in, say, the history of cinema, right? Where are the first experiments going on right here, and then very soon I don't France just runs out of steam in the 20th century somehow. But in a novel like this one, you can see that, you can catch a bit of that late 19th century spirit, and again it's very familiar. Like the first films were made in France, and the first kind of forerunners of Amazon were started in France too, right? So it's an amazing historical insight that it provides.
Yeah, so it's almost like we can look back at an analog,
Yeah,
us like shifted back.
yeah,
And maybe we can also, that helps us look forward. Like, what will our decadence look like?
yeah,
We've
right,
already
right.
probably begun that. Oh, did you know that Gustave Eiffel was designed? Maybe it's Beaumarchais, one of these interiors of the department stores he designed, and apparently the
Huh.
architect in Au Bonheur des Dames is based on him. And so the architect,
Interesting.
these
Oh, right.
glass and
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah,
elevated walkways and whatever
yeah.
are um
Right. Yeah,
so
yeah, 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 yeah. Certainly. Yeah, yeah. You said you wanted to write about that. You have a piece you're developing on this novel. You
yes,
chose this one in particular.
I chose this one. I don't think it's his best novel. I think L'Assommoir, like artistically, up to what I've read artistically, that's the best.
Mm-hmm.
But but there's so many. My problem is there's so many things about this novel that speak to me
Mm-hmm.
that it's really hard to fasten on one of them. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think what I'm really maybe interested in is this question of, why do women shop? And this kind of interplay between like gender relations, sexuality, and shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of like, there's this, all of a sudden there's this space for women. That's a really big part of what the store
Yeah.
is women can be out in public and they're not prostitutes.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
they're like permitted to be out. They're it's like a, you know, well, it's not a, it's a second space for women, not a third space, because they don't have work, right? So
Yeah. Right.
that is,
Right.
the women who worked in their homes.
Yeah.
And so it's like a place to be out in public and just to be gallivanting around, but you're
Mm-hmm.
not outdoors in a park, and you're not going to be mistaken for a prostitute. And to actually not just to be out in public, but to be out in public in a way where you feel like it's a kind of realization of who you are.
Yeah.
You have this kind of, it has an emotional fervor, and your sexuality, which in so many contexts, perhaps all of them, has to be repressed, is in some way those repressions are lifted in the context of
Yeah.
this store. So it's
Yeah.
like this experience of femininity for these women,
Yeah.
but it's also this situation of male dominance at one
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
And that all of that is a scene of consumption and wealth and economic growth. I just
Yeah.
find that package to be fascinating. So that's what I want to
Yeah.
write about. This will be a short essay, and then I might write just like a longer thing on all of the novels eventually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my research, I'm overdoing it in research for this one essay,
Yeah.
but I'm telling myself it'll
Right.
work for the for
Right,
the
right,
longer thing.
right. But does this are you close to being able to answer the theoretical question that you're meditating on right now?
Why do
Why
women
did
shop?
yeah.
Um, I think I'm somewhere. I'm somewhere on the road to the answer that I will arrive at. I can't tell how far, but like the current version of the answer is something like it's a form of self-actualization, like a way to have a self in a more robust sense. It's almost like you could be, you could be walking, you could be used to inhabiting spaces and feeling like nobody even sees you and you don't matter. And then all of a sudden you feel like you can externally manifest that you have a self, and then that actually feels like a self to you. So you like become a person, or you become an individual somehow, something like that. But at the same time, it's also sexual. But maybe that's like just part of having a self, is that your sexuality is such an important part of you that it would have to be, in some sense, manifested, represented. And so the kind of the way in which the expression of sexuality is made permissible within confines, right? In the store, that seems important to that as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Those are my
even if
thoughts about it.
Even if it kind of spills over into a kind of paraphilia, right? In the case of, say, shoplifting.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
This is there are lots of different kinds of pathology. Madame Marty is another pathology. She ruins her poor husband who can't afford. Like Zola. What's great about Zola is that he does not shield you from the dark side. So it's like, this is it's a form of self-actualization, self-realization. It's also incredibly destructive, even to the people whose self-actualization it is.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's ingenious. That's going to be an exciting essay, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, well, listen, right now I'm back to reading Flaubert. I think the last time I talked to you, I was back to reading Balzac. So I'm not particularly faithful to Zola these days, but I surely will get back to him at some point. I think Nana is going to be the next. And I think we'll have to do another
Absolutely. That's you're gonna be bathed in vulgarity again.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna reread Madame Bovary soon. So
oh, you are? Okay.
Do a conversation on that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm reading L'Éducation sentimentale, and I thought I had read it before, but I think if I read it, my French was so bad that I literally was not retaining anything, because everything that's happening is totally fresh and new to me. But certainly Flaubert, whom I think is a greater writer on certain measures, he is a lot less of a page turner than Zola is. I can read Zola in a very carefree way, just flying through the pages. With Flaubert, I have to, it still feels a bit like work. It's rewarding work, but it's a very different reading experience. But this is has a lot to do with their I guess priorities. I think Flaubert's priority is always getting language just right. I think Zola's priority is telling a gripping story.
And showing you a world, I think.
Yeah, showing you a world. Yeah.
I think that, so there's an interesting feature of Zola that I don't think Balzac shares at all, which is that he wants to show you one class at a time.
Yeah.
In a novel. So he might, he'll show you the upper class in one novel, and you'll pretty much only be seeing the upper class. The servants will come in and out in the background. Here, what we see is that sort of the middle class, the lower middle class. Mouret belongs to the same class of people who are working for him, basically.
Yeah.
And so you get this sort of slice of society, and it's also very confined in space and time. So it's usually just a couple of years or less, and usually, like here, we're just within like one city block or something the whole time. And so you get this micro world that he wants to show you, where a lot is being left out. And the world is kind of an equilibrium. It functions by its own rules. And that's sort of what I see as distinctive of Zola, is giving you where what he's interested in is the kind of this crowd of people that are
Yeah.
organized in this way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah,
uh
you're absolutely right, and yeah, I've been noticing that, but it's only when you articulate that I really see it clearly, and I think that's kind of part of what annoyed me a little bit in L'Assommoir, and maybe annoyed me a little bit even here, which is that, as a matter of fact, in reality, worlds overlap a great deal, right? And I have just today interacted with working class people, with immigrants. I shook the hand of an aristocrat, et cetera, et cetera. I literally did these things today,
yeah.
right? Um, and um, and it seems to me that that this kind of segregation, like fictional segregation, kind of doesn't really show us uh, the interweaving complexity of social reality, and that comes through. I think also the way everyone in L'Assommoir shared the same vibe. They didn't have all the same
Mhm.
pathologies to all the same degrees, but I found myself reading L'Assommoir and wondering, like, is anyone serious ever going to just cross through the room at any point, right? Is anyone who has their act together going to show up, right? And maybe the doctor at the hospital in the final scenes had
Mhm.
his act together, but that's the way social reality actually works. You don't get a bunch of pathological weirdos, hermetically sealed off. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Um,
I think that's right. But so I think the way to think about it is that there is think about microeconomics versus
mhm,
macroeconomics. Okay, so
mhm,
microeconomics is like supply and demand, and it's like, you can have like game theory, you can have a very local study of how things work. Whereas macro is like, let's look at the actual economy and
yeah,
and then the second one is kind of like maybe not so much of a science. Like, how
mhm,
often can they predict like
yeah,
a recession or right housing bubble bursting? And the macro people might say what you've just said, which is like, look, these little games or whatever. I mean, in real life, everything interacts. And then Zola would be like, with the micro people, I'm interested in science. I'm interested in knowledge
yeah,
and what can be known.
yeah,
And I'm not interested in being one of those novelists who just makes stuff up, because that's what you get to
yeah,
do when you talk about these things intersecting. You can say whatever. And
right,
I think he really likes the constraints of saying there are rules in this world.
uh-huh,
And one of the really like significant ways that he brings that out is that rebels are always punished in Zola. So
yeah,
there are
right,
these
right,
rebellious characters. Buras is a rebel. If someone's like, I'm going to fight the system, I'm not going to accept the way things are, whatever. They like unfailingly do not anticipate the effects of their actions and just
yeah,
and they're just squashed. And
yeah,
rebellion doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because if you're poor, you're trapped in the world of the
yeah,
poor, and there's no way out.
yeah,
And so as a reader, it's claustrophobic.
mhm,
You're like,
mhm,
wait, like I want a little bit of, aristocratic refinement or whatever. And Zola's just not going to give it to you. And
yeah,
you're right that these people cross paths
yeah,
with, they're in the Louvre at some point in L'Assommoir, right? So
yeah,
there might be, fancy people in there, but there is, Zola's just really interested in looking at them insofar as they are trapped in sort of a class, but also more narrowly, like a geographic and whatever.
yeah,
And I think because he thinks that there he can, based on observation, work out logically sort of what has to happen rather than just
mhm,
making stuff up, which is
yeah,
what he thinks
right.
a lot of fiction authors are doing.
Yeah, which is confirmation of this earlier point that Zola is both a novelist and a social scientist. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to read your piece on him, and let's do another one of these when we've both read some more literature.
Great.
Good.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks for talking to
Agnes.
me.
Bye bye.